Hello, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we're going over effects and techniques in Photoshop. And in this video, we'll be drawing more focus to our subject by blurring out the background. Naturally, our eyes are drawn to crisp edges and clear details, rather than blurred edges and muddy details. This is what gives us a sense of depth and spatial awareness. Usually, as a photographer, you'd be able to manually adjust the focus using the settings on your camera before you take the photo. But how would you go about changing the focus after you've taken the photo? In this tutorial, we're going over some of Photoshop's blur features to see if we can blur the background of this pre-existing photo and create the illusion of some extra depth. Blurring the background can be a very effective way to put all the attention on your subject in the foreground. So the first thing I'll have to do is to separate my subject from the background. I'd like to isolate this lady so I can place her on her own layer. To do that, I'll go to my Tools panel and grab the Quick Selection tool. Then I'll just start dragging to create my outline. Now the Quick Selection tool is probably the easiest selection tool to just pick up and start using. But you may notice that with that convenience comes some setbacks. I'll show you what I mean once I'm done making my outline. Again, I'm just trying to make a general outline of this lady, and if there's any areas I want to remove from my selection, I can just hold the Alt key and drag in those areas to remove them. This selection should be pretty easy to make. The only tricky area will be the top of her hair, since it's not only kind of wispy, it also sort of blends in with the tone of the background at the edges. Okay, that looks pretty good. Not a perfect selection, but it's about as good as I'm going to get with the Quick Selection tool. Before I proceed with isolating this in the background, I just want to get a closer look at it. You see, the selection might look okay from this distance, but that doesn't mean that it's going to look as good up close. With my selection still active and my background layer still selected, I'm just going to go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click the New Layer Mask button. Now with the background masked out, I can get a much better idea of what the selection actually looks like. Now I'll switch to my Zoom tool by hitting the Z key on my keyboard so I can get a closer look. As I push in here, you can see the selection is really not so good at all. It's picking up her clothes pretty well, but as I move into the hair, you can see that the edges are suffering very badly. They look all jagged, messy, and inconsistent. Sometimes that's the trade-off with using the Quick Selection tool. You can make a very general selection very quickly, but be prepared to deal with some very poor edges. I'm going to take a couple steps back. First, I'll zoom back out. Then I'll just hit Ctrl-Alt-Z on my keyboard to step backwards in time and undo the history state where I converted my selection into a mask. Now I'm back to just having the same raw selection I had before. So I'll switch back to my Quick Selection tool. And instead of using this selection as is, I'm going to try a very helpful feature up here in the tool options. I'm going to click the Refine Edge button. The Refine Edge dialog lets you manage the finishing touches of your selection, and is especially useful when it comes to the edges of the selection. The first thing I notice is that the Refine Edge has made it very easy to visually distinguish my selection from the background. And if I click here in the View thumbnail, I have multiple options for viewing my isolated selection as I make adjustments to it. I could click on Marching Ants, which is the default selection view. I could click on Overlay to see my selection in a quick mask mode with the red tint. I could click on Black to see my selection up against a plain black background. I could click on White to see my selection up against a plain white background. I could click Black and White to see the mask itself without any other colors or details. I could click on Layers to see my selection up against the checkerboard pattern again. And finally, if I want to see my original layer without any hint of my selection, I can click Reveal Layer. I think in this case, I liked my selection up against a white background the best. So I'll switch back to On White. Now I can get to work on these sliders to help improve my edge. I'd like to invite a bit more detail into the fringes of this hair. So I'm going to increase the radius to about 8 pixels. The hair is already looking a little better now, but it's still looking a little bit rough. So I'll go down to Smooth and increase that to around 40. Wow, the edges are looking much smoother now. I want to get a bit of a closer look at my edges. So I'm going to select the Zoom tool in the Refine Edge dialog. Then just click 2 or 3 times in my canvas to get a closer look at my subject. Now I'll go down to the feather option, and I'll increase that to about 3. This isn't making a huge difference, but it's just enough to make my edge look a bit kinder on the eyes. Now with the feather, I ended up making the edges a little blurry. I'll draw a bit more focus by increasing the contrast option around 40. Now my edge is really getting some definition. The only thing is these clothes. They still have this sort of outline from the background. No worries. I'm going to go down to Shift Edge, and I'll bring that down to around -25. There we go. I'll just switch to my Zoom tool and zoom out to get more of an overall view. Very nice. With just a few sliders, I turned a hastily made, jagged, and inconsistent selection into clean, defined edges. Now I want to use the selection on a new layer with its own mask. So I'll go here in the Output To box and select New Layer with Layer Mask. And then I'll click OK. Now I'm looking at a duplicate of my background layer with my new refined selection as its layer mask. What's important about this is that I still have full access to my original layer. I can just press and hold Shift on my keyboard, go to my Layers panel, and click my layer mask to temporarily disable it. I'll click again to enable it back. Then I'll click the eye icon on my original background layer to show it. I'll need this layer since I want to use 2 different layers for more control of my blurred background. Now I'm going to be applying some filters to this layer, so my next step will be to convert it to a smart object. This will give me more control of my filters, even after I apply them. So to convert this to a smart object, I'll just right-click it and click Convert to Smart Object. And it will automatically unlock my layer and convert it to a smart object. Okay, so the goal here is to blur the background from the subject. So I'll rename this layer to Background. And then I'll rename my subject layer to Foreground. Great! Now I'll select my background layer and proceed with applying my blur. I'll just go up to Filter, Blur, and let's try the first option, Average. Well, in this case, the blur is pretty much worthless. It's blurred my background out beyond recognition. Now it's basically just a plain gray background. And if I go over here in my Layers panel to my Smart Filters and double-click my Average blur, no options or sliders pull up whatsoever. Not quite the level of control I was hoping for. I'm going to go ahead and drag my Average blur to the trash icon to delete it. I'll see what my other filters have to offer. I'll go up to Filter, Blur, then Blur again. Okay, I don't know about you, but I don't see any difference at all. Maybe it's because my background is already kind of blurry as is. Anyways, I'll drag this filter to the trash icon. Now I'll go back up to Filters, Blur, and this time I'll try Blur More. Okay, maybe that did blur my background a little bit, but I'm still not seeing any worthwhile difference. On top of that, there's still no sliders or options to manually control the blur amount. I'll drag this one to the trash icon as well. I'm going to keep trying. So I'll go up to Filters, Blur, Box Blur. Oh, here we go. Now I actually have a slider I can use to control my blur. Finally, I can make my background as blurry as I want. The only problem I'm seeing is that since this blur is influenced by a box shape, it seems to be pushing all edges out from themselves in each direction individually. As a result, I'm not really getting the soft, natural blur I'm looking for. I'll cancel this and go back up to Filters, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. Alright, I'm getting the same sort of radius slider I had before. I'll try increasing it. Ah, there we go. Now do I not only have a blur that I can control, it is also giving me that soft, feathery naturalness I wanted. Very cool. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this for now because I want to see what else Photoshop has to offer. I'll go back up to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. This one is very interesting. Like the box blur, it pushes straight out. But unlike the box blur, it only seems to blur out in two directions. This allows me to simulate the illusion of movement with my blur. Very interesting. As an added bonus, I can also change the angle of the blur, which lets me decide what direction I want both sides of my blur to be coming from. I'll hit Cancel, go up to Filters, Blur, and Radial Blur. Now the dialog box for this blur is pretty different. I have an amount slider, but I also have these buttons for different radial blur settings, including spin, zoom, and even different quality settings in case the blur may be too hardware intensive. I'll cancel this again. There's just a few more blurs to consider. I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Shape Blur. Now shape blur is kind of like the box blur and the motion blur, only it allows me to use a custom shape to define the influence of the blur. I'm not sure how people would use this, but it's awesome that Photoshop provides us with the option. I'll hit Cancel, Filters, Blur, Smart Blur. Now, Smart Blur basically takes Gaussian blur and provides even more options to play with, including threshold, quality, and even an option to change the mode of the edges. But it should be noted that you won't see the blur take effect on the canvas until you actually click OK to apply the blur. I'll hit Cancel, Filters, Blur, Surface Blur. Surface Blur provides the same radius and threshold options that were in Smart Blur, but it sort of simplifies things, and as a result, allows you to see your blur on the canvas because it's not so hardware intensive. I'll hit Cancel for one last time. In my opinion, a blur doesn't need to be very complicated. It just needs to feather out the details of your image so you can draw focus to the crisp edges in other areas of your image, like your foreground. It's because of this that I like the Gaussian blur the most. I'll go up to Filters, Blur, Gaussian blur. The Gaussian blur is quick to pull up, simple with just one slider to worry about, and the blur itself is easy on the eyes. And finally, you can see all your changes in the canvas in real time. I'm going to bring my Gaussian blur radius up to 15 pixels and click OK. And since the layer I'm applying it to is a smart object, I can always double click it in the Layers panel and change it to whatever I like. Okay, that will do it for background blurring. I'll go over another effect and technique in the next video.